What is going on, guys and gals? Brooklyn bound the raid scientist here with another Destiny 2 raid guide. Today, we're going to travel to the depths of the Leviathan and destroy the corrupted Galran the Sorrowbearer. This raid has 4 encounters and is a fairly short raid released during the Season of Opulence. It houses many of the Hive and Leviathan 2.0 mods like Hive Armaments, Hive Barrier, Striking Hand, etc. And in addition, a decent 1-2 punch shotgun and the Taraba, which is an exotic submachine gun, can all drop in this raid. While the raid is a short one, it is fairly mechanic heavy and doesn't really have any easy jobs, so I don't necessarily recommend this raid as a starter if you're new to raiding. But overall, once you understand these mechanics, it really isn't very difficult. To start, you'll enter a very familiar looking area for the first encounter. This is the same area from the Menagerie that you will do the Mockery and Arcborn encounters. First thing you'll want to do is split your team into 3 pairs and get comfortable with each other, because you'll be working with that partner throughout the entire raid. For the first encounter, super selection doesn't really matter that much. However, hunters running Bottom Tree Golden Gun with Celestial Nighthawk can easily one-shot ogres, and Well of Radiance on Warlock is always helpful. Weapon-wise, I recommend one weapon with some range like a pulse or a scout so you can take down the crystals easily. And finally, a good shotgun or fusion rifle to kill Orange Bar Knights is essential. Once you've split your team up into pairs, assign 1 pair to cover the left side, 1 pair to cover the middle, and 1 pair to cover the right side. Each area will have waves of enemies you'll want to take out and manage throughout the entire encounter. Overall, the goal of this encounter is to simply survive all the waves of enemies and destroy the Hive crystals that spawn at the end of each wave. You have 8 total waves to clear. Now, right off the bat is when you'll learn the first and most important mechanic in this entire raid. That is the Witch's Blessing buff. When you enter the area, you'll see a green pool of light on the floor, and stepping in it starts the encounter and gives everyone in it the Witch's Blessing buff. This buff lasts for 60 seconds and allows you to damage or kill any of the enemies in the raid that are blessed. And vice versa, when you have Witch's Blessing, you cannot damage or kill the enemies that are not blessed. So, when this encounter starts, you'll want to have 1 person from each section, left, middle, and right, step in the pool to pick up the Blessing buff, which will give you 1 person in each section that can kill the blessed knights and 1 person without the blessing who can kill the unblessed thrall and acolytes. This way, as a pair, you can kill all of the enemies in your section. After a wave of knights and minor adds, boomer acolytes will spawn up on the balcony on the top left and right. 1 set of these acolytes will be blessed, meaning only a person with the blessing can kill them, and the other set will be unblessed, meaning only an unblessed person can kill them. It is random which side gets which type. Once the boomers and extra adds are dead, 3 crystals will spawn in the 3 areas. Each pair of 2 has to shoot the crystals together to destroy them. You need 1 blessed and 1 unblessed person to damage each crystal for them to shatter. If you don't destroy the crystals in about 10 seconds, they will explode and wipe the raid. Their locations are random, and they are pretty easy to find. There is 1 sneaky one that can spawn in the back corner behind the gazebo, but other than that, you can see them all from under the Bather statues on the front side. Once the crystals have been destroyed, you have finished 1 wave of enemies, and now can switch the Witch's Blessing buff, because as I mentioned earlier, this buff only lasts for 60 seconds. And what I didn't tell you yet was that after that 60 seconds, you will die if you still have it. Therefore, you have to swap your blessing buff to another player without the blessing and keep passing it back and forth throughout this encounter. You swap the buffs by using the purple glowing witch's cauldrons that are located in the front middle area. In this area, there's only 1. After all the crystals are destroyed, all 6 players will run into the purple aura in the middle and shoot the cauldron. This will cause the cauldron to temporarily despawn because you've used it, and it will swap the blessing to any player that didn't have it, and it will remove the blessing from any player that did. So, after the first rotation, the 3 people that started with the blessing will now be unblessed, and the 3 people that were unblessed will now have the buff. Therefore, the adds you are responsible for in your section will also change. The blessed person always kills the knights, and the unblessed person always kills the minor adds. After the swap, everyone will return to their area and repeat the same thing, clearing adds. On the second wave, instead of boomers spawning up top on the left and right, an ogre will spawn instead. One of the ogres will be blessed, and one of them will be unblessed. At this point, you want to head to the ogre you are able to damage to help kill it quickly. Using a golden gun here or a super on them isn't a bad idea either. After the ogres will be another crystal that needs to be destroyed in each section, and then everybody will head back to the middle and swap again. You basically keep repeating this pattern every 45 to 60 seconds. Adds, then boomers, then crystals, then swap. Adds, then ogres, then crystals, then swap. And then it repeats. Adds, boomers, crystals, swap. Adds, ogres, crystal swaps. For a total of 8 waves and 8 sets of crystals. You will know you're progressing because the big blue lanterns across the chasm will illuminate after every 2 waves. A few final notes about the blessing and the cauldrons before we move further into the raid. First, if you die with the blessing, you will lose it. So, if at any point in the first encounter, if anyone with the blessing dies with it, your ratio of blessed to unblessed players will be off, and if you don't correct it, it will continue to be off after swapping. Therefore, if someone dies with the blessing, they can get a new buff from another blessed player. This is done by that player that needs the buff entering the purple aura witch's cauldron and calling for a buff by themselves. Then, if another player that is blessed shoots the cauldron from outside the aura, it will replicate their blessing onto the player inside the aura, but will not remove the buff from the player that was outside. Remember, only players standing in the purple aura right next to the cauldron will have their blessing either added or removed. This becomes even more important of a mechanic later in the raid, so make sure you understand how to rebuff someone. Finally, if for some crazy reason all the blessed players die and everyone loses their blessing, a new green pool will spawn back at the entrance for as many players who need to enter it. But likely, if you're at this point, you're probably close to wiping anyways. After the first encounter, jump across the platforms, collect your loot, and head further in. You'll traverse some pipes and eventually enter a big open chasm where the other side is very high up and very far, far away. This is the second encounter and is a jumping puzzle with more crystals. There are no enemies in this counter. You'll definitely want a weapon with some range here and maybe even multiple, since without enemies you cannot get any additional ammo. This encounter introduces a new type of crystal as well, and that is the shielded crystal with a white aura around it. The only difference between the shielded crystals and the ones you just dealt with in the previous encounter is that the shielded crystals have to be shot by entering the aura and shooting them at very close range. You cannot shoot them from far away. You'll also see another green pool. It's easiest just to keep the same pairings and same assignments here left and right, and the team that did the middle in the last encounter will be the backup crystal shooters. You don't have to keep the same teams if you don't want, but it makes things easier. To start, have the same 3 people from the first encounter jump in the green pool again and get the buff. This will spawn a shielded crystal right in front of you. At least 1 blessed and 1 unblessed player need to enter the aura and destroy it. Once destroyed, 3 unshielded crystals will spawn up in the darkness that can be shot from afar. Then, once they are destroyed, platforms will spawn with more shielded crystals. To keep things organized, the team responsible for left will always go to the leftmost shielded crystal, and the right team will always go to the rightmost shielded crystal. Sometimes there is only one, so keep that in mind as you're jumping. Destroy the newly spawned shielded crystals on the platforms, and then Subsequently destroy the 3 unshielded crystals that will spawn up in the air again in random spots. Then, jump to the new platforms and continue this all the way up. You will reach 3 checkpoints along the way, with Witch's Cauldrons allowing you to swap buffs so the blessed players don't die to it. If you wipe, you will restart at the last cauldron you activated. You just keep following this pattern until you reach the top. It's relatively easy. Once you've collected your loot, the door will open, showing you a giant gold-filled arena with Galron the Sorrowbearer spawning at the furthest point from you. This will now begin the 3rd encounter. You'll want at least 1 Titan with the Weapons of Light Bubble, Warlocks with Well of Radiance and Lunafaction Boots for fast reload, and Hunters on Golden Gun with Celestial Nighthawk for both boss damage and killing ogres. Weapons, you'll want 1 person to run Tractor Cannon for a damage boost, and everyone else should be running meta DPS weapons. At the time of making this video, spike grenade launchers like Swarm of the Raven or Wendigo are amazing here. Snipers aren't really great because the boss is hard to crit during DPS. Once again, each player should have a good shotgun or fusion rifle as they will need it for killing the witches that spawn and the ogres. When you enter the arena, you'll notice that it has a triangular shape over a wall with 3 different sections. The one on the left with the purple we just call Void, the section in the middle with the large staircase we call Stairs, and the section to the right with the Warbeast statues we call Dogs. You can call them whatever you want. Once again, you'll pair up. Each pair will be responsible for 1 section, and it doesn't matter which. You'll also notice a shielded mini-boss in each section as well. Meleeing one of these bosses will start the encounter. The goal of the encounter is to kill Galron's Deception, and to do this, you have to transfer a Witch's Blessing buff across all 3 sections to be used to bring down his shield to damage him. So, when the encounter does start, each of the 3 sections will be walled off from the others with a hive barrier wall. Then, randomly, the game will choose which section starts with the buff, which section gets the boss, and which section is the middle section. For the purpose of this explanation, I'm going to just call them sections 1, 2, and 3. Section 1 being the section that is randomly assigned with the green pool, allowing players to grab the blessing buff, and section 3 being the section that is given the mini-boss. Section 2 is the section in the middle between the 2. The order is always clockwise, meaning whichever section is section 1 with the buff, section 2 will be clockwise from that, and section 3 will be clockwise from 2. Whichever pair is given section 1, the one with the buff pool, should have 1 person pick it up and 1 person stay out. This will leave you with 1 buffed and 1 unbuffed person in section 1. Sections 2 and 3 will all be unbuffed for the first wave of adds. The waves of adds in this encounter follow a very simple pattern. Wizard with minor adds, a second wizard with minor adds, and then an ogre. Only someone without the blessing buff can kill the wizards. So, at the start, in section 1, only 1 person can kill the wizards since 1 person will have the buff. And in the other 2 sections, each pair of people can kill the wizards together because they are all unbuffed. After all 3 ogres in each section have been killed after the first wave, a Witch's Cauldron will spawn between sections 1 and 2. At this point, both players from section 1 will enter the purple aura from their side, and 1 person from section 2 will enter from their side. All 3 players will shoot the cauldron, and this will swap the buff between the 2 players in section 1, and it will give the buff to the 1 player who entered from section 2. When the cauldron is used, the wall between the 2 sections also breaks down. Now you will have 1 blessed and 1 unblessed person in sections 1 and sections 2, and the 2 people in section 3 will still be unblessed. Now another wave of wizards and ogres needs to be cleared in all 3 sections, and, just like the first time, once all 3 ogres are down, the cauldron will spawn. This time it will be between sections 2 and sections 3. And now, all 4 players from sections 1 and 2 should enter this purple aura from their side, and both players from section 3 should also enter from their side. Now, all 6 players together will be in the aura, and when they shoot, the buffs will swap and the wall will come down. This should leave you with 4 blessed players and 2 unblessed players. And everyone will finally be able to access the boss as all of the walls will now be down. Now you can get ready to start the DPS phase. In order to damage the boss, you have to break his immunity shield. This is done by having one player with the blessing and one player without the blessing melee him at the same time. If done correctly, the shield will lower and he will be damageable. Note that whichever player had the blessing when meleeing the mini-boss to break his shield will lose their blessing once his shield has been broken. This is very important as you want to have only one blessed player near the boss during the melee. Otherwise, all the people with the blessing will lose their buff and you'll only be able to break down the boss's shield once instead of multiple times. One shield break will give you about 10 seconds or so of DPS time. So if you have 4 or even 5 blessed players, you can one at a time break his shield every time it comes back up and get a long window of damage. Make sure you have someone using tractor cannon to improve your damage and keep the boss away from the outer walls, as he can get stuck in them and you will be unable to hit him. One final note about damage phase is that anyone with the blessing cannot damage the boss. So after the first melee shield break, you will likely only have 3 people able to damage him. But then we'll have 4 after the second break, 5 after the third break, and then all 6 players will be able to shoot him after the 4th break. Note that the tractor cannon can still be applied by somebody who is blessed, it just won't damage him. If you don't do enough damage to one phase him, everybody will head back to their sections and repeat the process. The mini-boss will respawn in all 3 sections, and you'll need to melee him again to start the second round. Make sure you don't do this until everybody has made it back to their section, because the walls will come up instantly once he is hit, and if someone is in the wrong area, they won't be able to get back. Repeat all the steps again, and once the boss finally falls, collect your chests and get ready for the final encounter. You are now going to go up against Galaran the Sorrowbearer and his identical twins. Well, kinda. This final encounter will piece together all the mechanics you've learned thus far into one encounter that is action-packed. Titans want to run Bubble with Helm of Saint 14 if you have it. Hunters, Celestial Nighthawk with Bottom Tree Golden Gun. And Warlocks, Well of Radiance with Lunafaction Boots. Weapons, once again, a good fusion or shotgun is essential for the knights, and whatever DPS meta weapons are current for the time. As I mentioned earlier, coupled with a tractor cannon, spike grenade launchers are great, but since this boss doesn't really move and also has a fairly big crit spot, snipers with firing line or Izanagi's Burden are amazing too. The fight takes place in the same arena, so you should have a good understanding of the layout already. Once again, you'll work in pairs, so you can keep the same teams if you want. Each pair again will be responsible for each section: Void, Stairs, and Dogs. In addition, each pair will also have their own individual cauldron for swapping buffs. We always assign the cauldron to the right of each section for each team, but it's up to you. Just designate the same cauldron for the same teams. To start the encounter, shoot Galaran in the face, and he'll replicate him onto all 3 sections. You'll need to identify which Galaran is real before you can start DPS phase. Also, when the encounter starts, a green buff pool will appear right by where the rally flag is. You want to have one person from each section stand in this pool to get the buff. This way, you will have one blessed and one unblessed player in each section. Now, everyone goes to their sections and starts clearing ads. The blessed player has to take out the knights, while the unblessed player takes care of the minor ads. Once the timer of the blessed player starts to get low, you can go to your assigned cauldron together and swap the buff between each other. Then return to your section for more adds. After a series of knights and minor adds, the mini-bosses from the last encounter will start spawning in each of the 3 sections one at a time, meaning one section will get the mini-boss, while the other 2 sections will get an ogre instead. Then, a short time later, the second section will get the mini-boss, and the final section will get a second ogre. And then finally, the last section will get their mini-boss. The goal when your side gets the mini-boss is to break his shield and stun him, and then trigger Galran to destroy him with his giant cleaver. To do this, both players on your side need to melee the mini-boss at the same time. Remember, you need one blessed and one unblessed player to melee to break his shield. You also want to do this when he is up near the big boss, so don't do it when he's down the steps or near the cauldrons. Once you break his shield, it will stun the mini-boss, and then shortly after that, Galran's hand will glow green, and if shot, he will bring down a giant axe and kill the mini-boss. If he misses, that means the mini-boss wasn't close enough, and you'll have to aggro him up a little closer to Galran and shoot the green hand again. Also note, remember that meleeing the mini-boss to break his immunity shield will strip the buff off of the player with the blessing, meaning that after you melee your mini-boss and you shoot Galran to destroy him, you will not have a blessed player in your section. This is where the strategy of giving and receiving a buff I explained earlier comes into play. If any unblessed player walks into a witch's cauldron and shoots, while a second player with the blessing shoots the same cauldron while not standing in the aura, it will replicate the buff onto the player that doesn't have it and not strip the buff from the player standing outside of it. So, after this melee sequence, one player from your section should go to your swapper and call out to be rebuffed with the blessing. Then, any player from the other sections with the blessing can shoot the cauldron from afar and it will rebuff that player. Once all 3 sections have had Galran cleaver their mini-boss, it will trigger the start of the DPS phase of the fight. Before I go into DPS phase, there is one more mechanic that is a giant pain in this encounter, and that is the return of the shielded crystals from the jumping section. When the fight starts, one section will get a shielded crystal they have to destroy. Once it shatters, the next section clockwise from this will get the next crystal, and it will keep rotating to each section every 15 seconds or so for the entire fight. So keep this in mind when planning to melee your mini-boss, because if you lose your buff from punching your mini-boss and then you get a crystal, you are going to have to scramble to get to it or get rebuffed before it wipes the raid. The crystal will pause from spawning for about 30 seconds during damage phase before starting to spawn again. So, as I mentioned, after all 3 mini-bosses are down, the DPS phase will begin. All 3 Galrans in all 3 sections will raise their hands up in the air. When they do this, you need to shoot them down immediately. Have one person in each section focus on one hand each. Once his hands have been lowered all the way back down by shooting them, you can then focus on shooting him in the head. After enough damage to the head, he will either flinch or disappear. If he disappears, your section had one of the fake Galrans, and DPS will not be in your section. Whichever section has Galran flinch and stay has the real one, and that is the section where DPS will take place. After each team has flinched or disappeared their replicate of Galran, they should immediately do one more swap at their own cauldron, and then all 6 players will hightail it to the section that has the real one for damage. Drop a Well of Radiance right in front of him, a Weapons of Light bubble, and his hands will raise again. You have to shoot his hands down immediately. If they raise up in the air for too long before shooting them down, you are going to lose precious DPS time. So do not let him raise his hands for more than a second or so. Once the real Galran's hands have been shot, he will finally be damageable. Unload your heavy, golden guns, tractor cannon, and whatever you want on him for about 10 seconds before he goes immune and raises his hands again. If you shoot his hands down fast enough, you will get 10 more seconds of DPS time. You can get a total of 3 DPS phases by shooting his hands 3 times if you're quick enough. If you're not fast enough on the hands, you will lose a phase or even more, and will likely have to 2-phase the boss. After DPS phase, each pair needs to sprint to their own cauldron to swap again, because the blessing buff is still ticking during DPS. Swap again, and then head back to your sections to repeat it all over again. The crystal will start spawning again, and everything will be done again to reach another DPS phase and finish him off. When he falls, the hive crown that corrupted him will fall to the ground, and Galran's soul will be freed. Congratulations, you've just completed the Crown of Sorrows. Best of luck on getting that Taraba to drop if you're after it. If you learned something today, like the video, or just want to help me out, please hit that thumbs up and click the little bell icon to subscribe to my channel to get more of my Destiny 2 raid guides. Until next time, Guardians, best of luck.